right, time to go over some X-Acto knife details. First things first, you always want to make sure that you have a mat underneath what you are cutting. If you don't have a mat, you're going to do damage to the tables, and it's also going to be hard to cut. The mat kind of gives you a little bit of cushion for your knife to go through and glide through as it's going. When you're looking at the actual knife, there's a few parts to this. So you have the nice handle here, and right here is the blade. So the blade is extremely sharp. A lot of kids can get cut with it if you're not careful. So when we're talking about the X-Acto knife, this blade right here is the sharpest part. It can just slice your finger if you're not careful. But this part right here, I'm not even touching it, this is the tip. That is the very sharpest point of the X-Acto knife, and that's what you're going to be using to actually make your cuts. We never ever want to use this whole edge to cut. You actually won't make a nice cut going like that. You will only make a nice cut if you're cutting at an angle like this. So make sure that you are not purposely doling out the tips like this. Mrs. Cantrell and I hate that when kids do that. You need to make sure that you're not doing that. If you ever grab your knife and you notice that it is a little bit loose, do not start working with it. You want to make sure that it's nice and tight. So it's just, somebody might have accidentally, when they were working with it, been like gripping it to the left, which made it loosen up. So all you do is the non-sharp part of the knife, the non-beveled edge, just kind of hold it, make sure it's in, and then twist to the right. I'm twisting on the gripper. If you're nervous about that, bring it to Mrs. Cantrell and we will help you guys get it back in there. Please make sure you don't cut with it until it is tight. When you're holding it, you hold on to the grippy part. That's right here, not all the way up here. This is how a lot of people got cut last year. Never ever rest the blade against your hand. That's not where my hand is. My fingers are all the way back at the grippy part. Okay, I still have a good centimeter of space before my actual fingers and blood is close to the knife. So not like this. Yeah, I am holding onto the grippy, but the blade is resting on my middle finger. Wrong. Do not do that. You want to move it back a little bit and make sure you're holding it back here. I'm going to hold it just like a pencil, the same exact mechanisms that we use. When you're working, your edge needs to be pointed down. If you try and cut something on paper like this, it's not going to work. That beveled sharp edge needs to be tilted down like this. Again, this, even though it looks like it might be right, I'm literally I'm tearing the paper actually. You want to make sure the beveled edge is down. And you also want to make sure that you're always holding your X-Acto knife like an angle. A lot of people make the mistake to go flat against it. That actually does nothing, except really dull out your blade, to be honest. You want to make sure that you're working at an angle like that. So kind of like how a ballerina goes on her tippy toes. You're putting the X-Acto knife on its tippy toes. All right, now we're gonna do some practice. We're gonna have you guys practice a lot because these paper cut illustrations are full of a lot of details, a lot of small details. So it's important that you get your practice in here instead of messing up your papers. So we're just gonna kind of work through a little bit at a time, and I'll give you some tips and tricks as you're going through. When you're cutting, make sure that you're always aware of your free hand and know what direction you want to go in. So I put some helpful arrows here. It's always best if you're kind of pulling in the direction of this, kind of like top to bottom, almost in a diagonal direction. Left-handed people, you'll want to cut like this. So you want to position your paper in this way. I do not want to cut this line like this. Look at how wrinkled my wrist is, and I have cute little dainty wrists, okay? You want to make sure that you are cutting in a way that's comfortable. So instead, move that arrow so it's pointing at a diagonal, and you always want to make sure your free hand is doing the work for you, holding the paper, turning the paper, but your free hand always has to be opposite of where you're going to be cutting. You never want your free hand in the path of the blade. So even though this might feel comfortable to kind of rest your hand here, I'm going to slice my fingers off there, okay? So make sure your free hand's there. Also, don't put too much pressure on this. This is thin paper, okay? This is just really thin practice paper. You do not have to push so hard that you're shaking. If you're pushing so hard that you're shaking, stop. That's really dangerous. You're putting way too much pressure on it. You should feel like your X-Acto knife is an ice skate going through the ice. It should feel as smooth as Christy Yamaguchi's blade. I don't even know if you guys know that reference, but it is fine. So I'm going to make sure to put my hand up here, and I'm going to try my best to go on the line. Please notice how my knife is perpendicular to the paper. So the paper's flat and the knife is straight up and down, making a 90-degree angle. And I also want to make sure to start and stop where my line is. So again, even though this line is going down, look at the wrinkle in my wrist. Ow, that's not comfortable. It doesn't even look comfortable, guys. But if I put it at the diagonal, it's way more comfortable. Well, there's a little wrinkle still, but I'm old, right? Although I am quite proud of my age, I realized later that my hand was wrinkled because I was working at an uncomfortable angle like you are not supposed to do. Now, with something like a zigzag line, you're going to need your free hand to be turning the paper a lot to make sure that you're in a comfortable angle. Another trick is for the angles that are all going the same way, you just have to slide your hand over like that. Just always make sure that your hand is comfortable. Look at that. Now, if you notice that something's not coming apart, like this bottom of this, don't keep pulling. Look at the back and see where you missed a connection. So I missed it right there. And now it pulls apart really easily. Pulling does not help anything. Now, with curves, your free hand is really going to come into play here. Start with something that is comfortable, so that diagonal position for your hand. And then instead of your cutting hand turning, you're going to use your free hand to cut that line. Where do I want to start for the spiral? That's kind of tricky. I'm actually going to go this way. So you don't always have to start where you think you have to start. You want to start wherever what's comfortable for you. So I'm not even going to do this spiral in one solid line. I'm kind of breaking it up into 3 parts. I want you to notice 2 things here. Number 1, this is my real pace. This is IRL, how slowly I'm going. Number 2, I want you to notice that even though I'm doing curves, look at how my X-Acto knife blade is straight up and down parallel to the paper. I'm not moving it side to side. That's how cuts and mistakes happen. Keep that knife straight. Okay, so you got your crash course in lines. Now, as you guys will see, lines don't show negative space. If you want negative space to show up on these paper cut illustrations, is you actually have to cut out a shape. So even though on my Hogwarts example, I have like water lines here, they're not lines. They're actually shapes that I cut out, sort of like, they remind me of like a really, really skinny stretched out cursive S. So when you're working on shapes, you want to make sure to do the same thing. You want to make sure to always have your hand in a comfortable position, that diagonal position, free hand opposite. And you're just going to carefully start and stop. And then just don't be afraid to do little bits at a time. If you notice that you made a mistake, like right here I didn't go quite close enough, just carefully hold your paper and try and slide it and get that little sliver off. Little pressure. Now, something like a star, maybe it's easier if you cut it into shapes, like how, you know, the fake way of drawing a star. Instead of going around all those 10 edges, you can go around very like edges, and it makes your work a little bit quicker and kind of takes the pressure off of having to cut 10 different ways. Now, just like our curved lines up here, our more curvy shapes are going to require you to really be using your free hand, to be doing a lot of turning. Never, again, put your hand in an uncomfortable position. This would be a good time to tell you guys that any time that you have scraps, it's your responsibility to be cleaning them up. So I kind of like to keep my scraps in a little pile. That way at the end of class, I can just brush them into my hand and they're easy to get rid of.
The shapes that you see me cutting are very curvy, round shapes that revolve a lot of turning of the paper. But the one thing that's not turning is my X-Acto knife. I'm not flipping it to the left or flipping it to the right like when you flip a fish. I'm keeping it really nice and steady at that perpendicular angle with my paper.
All right, so those are your basic shapes, and you can see it would be revealing those shapes underneath, and that's what we're doing. Now we're gonna break it down smaller. Same thing that we just did, just smaller. So just be really cautious with where you start and where you stop, and take your time. Most of you guys are gonna have illustrations that have smaller elements like this. That's why we're having you practice them so teeny tiny, smaller than, you know, a fingernail, even smaller than even the stickers that I have on my fingernails, which look fabulous, don't they?
In real life, this tiny little clip took me 2.5 minutes. The teeny tiny organic shapes took me 4.5 minutes. Woo, look at those details.
Okay, on to the last two sections. Still working with geometric or organic shapes, but the difference here is this is going to be really similar to what you guys are doing on your paper cut illustrations. You're going to make sure that you are, I want to leave these white triangles, I want to leave these bubbles. So I am cutting the negative space around those things, but making sure that the white is still anchored to the white. So I'm cutting away the gray, it's going to go away, but I want these white circles to stay inside of this cloud shape, and I want these triangles to stay inside of this rectangle shape. So you're going to actually be cutting on the dotted line so you can kind of understand what the negative space is that you're cutting, but an anchored positive space to the outside edges. Ta-da! Look at that beautiful practice. Now you are ready to start on your actual illustrations.